Falling Down is a 1993 release thriller directed by Joel Schumacher.
It stars Michael Douglas as Bill Foster, who is just a normal guy in his car in a traffic jam, as many of us have been many times. It's a hot day in Los Angeles. There's all sorts of annoying things going on around him. His frustration is building until he just has had enough and he gets out of his car and walks off and just leaves his car in the traffic. And that is the sort of start of his journey across LA. He's trying to get to his ex-wife's house because it's his daughter's birthday. Obviously he's divorced, and there's a restraining order against him by his wife. So he shouldn't really be going there, but he's just snapped and he's determined to get there. He's had enough of the day, just wants to go to a happy place, I think. At the same time, there's a retiring cop by the name Martin Prendergast, who's played by Duvall. He's on his last day on the job. His wife is, well, she's kind of making him retire. I think he doesn't really want to. His heart's not really in it. But they're moving, far away from Los Angeles to start a new life somewhere else. And for most of the film, Michael Douglas's character Bill is sort of scene after scene of him encountering people, not really getting on with them. So first of all, he wants to make a call. He wants to phone his ex-wife. So he goes to a convenience store because he hasn't got any change. The guy won't give him any change. He says, you've got to buy something. So he takes a can of Coke, but unfortunately it's too expensive, so he won't have enough change out of his dollar bill. So you make the call. And again, he's obviously in this quite stressed state of mind, so he just snaps even more and wrecks the place. And he continues from there, causing chaos wherever he goes. It's not necessarily his intention to do that, but the people he encounters push him into that position. Obviously this then starts to attract the attention of the police, and Prendergast starts to wonder what's going on and are all these things related.
It's pretty hot today as well. I feel like I can attest to some of his his craziness, especially I work with the public, so on a very, very hot day, it's kind of you can feel that kind of which this film has in spades at times. It's an interesting one, this. It's we mainly chose it because obviously, for two reasons actually. I picked it. So the great Joel Schumacher, who directed the film, passed away a couple of weeks ago. Many films in his career: Us and Elmo's Fire, The Lost Boys, Flatliners, The Batman sequels. Is that right?
Yeah, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin.
Big Hollywood director, directed loads of films, and he sadly passed away a couple of weeks ago. I also there's this new film called Unhinged coming out by Russell Crowe, and I noticed in the reviews, a few reviews mentioned this film in there. So I thought it's not particularly unknown or obscure film, but I'd say out of Joel Schumacher's career, it's maybe one of his lesser known talked about ones. I mean, most people will usually pick, I suppose, the Batman films, or for me it would be The Lost Boys. That was always one of my favourites of his career. And Flatliners. I mean, Flatliners itself is quite an obscure one, although that kind of came back into the public eye a couple of years ago when it was remade. So I just thought this one, and the fact that it's been mentioned in the reviews of Unhinged seemed like quite a nice time to talk about it. And strangely, it's it kind of mirrors some of the things that are kind of going on in the world today. I think this kind of tension, that release of tension that feels like kind of boiling up to the surface somewhat. I mean, I haven't seen it for years and years. I used to really enjoy it when I was young.
I had it on VHS and then DVD. Yeah, I haven't watched it for a while, but no, I've seen it several times.
But watching it again this time, I still really enjoyed it. I mean, it's obviously there's stuff in there that's kind of feels like it's dated now, and there's also a couple of things in there that I wouldn't say they feel problematic, but there's scenes in there. I think what's really interesting about the film is that, when it first starts, Michael Douglas's character is trapped in this traffic jam, which it kind of mimics the opening scenes of the Fellini film 8.5, because that starts with a traffic scene, although that one is almost more claustrophobic than this one. But so it's this very hot day, and then he, like you said, he gets out of his car and he walks off, leaving this guy in the car behind, saying, "Where the hell are you going?" So at the beginning of the film, you're kind of rooting for him, but then very quickly you realise he's actually the villain of the piece. But there are many times where you want to root for him, and you kind of want to laugh with him, because there is this kind of dark humour going through the film, and there are some quite funny scenes in there. But at the same time, there are scenes like, so that first one in the convenience store, there's a moment he shouts at the guy. So the store owner is Korean, and he shouts at him for not being able to speak the language correctly. So there are moments in the film where it kind of feels like it's flipping side a little bit, and you're not sure whether you should root for him or you shouldn't root for him, which I think actually works in the film's favour. I mean, it's clearly not a very politically correct film, and it's quite an edgy feeling film. Although it's kind of, Joel Schumacher was someone who'd worked a lot with the big studios, so it's probably got that kind of big studio money behind it. But it feels it's a very awkward film. And I think it works well for that. Plus, Michael Douglas gives one hell of a performance.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, obviously, the couple of years previous, he was in Basic Instinct, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Cavorting with Sharon Stone.
Yeah.
And this couldn't really be a more different role, could it? It was quite a sort of nerdy guy, walking around town with his briefcase. But obviously, yeah, he does have this sort of anger issue bubbling under all the time. And he's just fed up of being trodden on, I suppose. I think it's revealed that he's lost his job. So you do feel sympathy for him because obviously, he does have issues, shall we say, but also he's a bit down on his luck. He's not divorced for no reason. Obviously, he does have this sort of temper. His wife was always afraid that he was going to do something. There are moments when you do sympathise with him, and obviously some of the people he encounters, the fast food restaurant that he goes into.
That's amazing, that scene.
And he's a couple of minutes late. After they've stopped serving breakfast, but they won't do it because it's like 4 minutes after they stop serving breakfast. By this point, he has a bag of guns, so yeah, he gets his gun out and demands breakfast. Although interestingly, when you see all the other diners in there, they all seem to be eating burgers. So it's like, have they all bought burgers in the last 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm being pedantic, but
yeah, maybe.
Or maybe you can buy burgers before they stop serving breakfast. I don't
know. But I think, I mean, that's really where that kind of this dark humour of the piece, this kind of black humour, appears, because I think that's a very funny scene. I mean, it clearly plays on the absurdity of rules and these odd little rules that we give ourselves. He then goes, he gets his burger. And he kind of looks at it, and he's like, "Oh, for God's sake!" And he picks it up, and it's like flopping around in his hand. And he says, "Look at the picture behind you. Does this look like that?" Which happens to us all. And
the burgers never look like the pictures.
Although I will say that when I visited Tokyo about 10 years ago, I went into a McDonald's, bought a Big Mac, and it was the one and only time it looked exactly like the picture behind. The Japanese are that, they're just. It was immaculate. It was amazing. So but usually when you go into these, it never looks. Obviously, it's not going to look like it does on. Not
going to look exactly the same, but sometimes you think this is not what I asked for. It doesn't look anything like it.
No, exactly. So that's a very funny scene, and it's also kind of. I mean, although it's a very funny scene, it's quite scary as well, because it almost. I mean, the film itself at times preempts that kind of. The gun sprees that we've had in America. The man going off on one and kind of going crazy and then releasing his anger on people. I think it says quite a lot, this film. It's got some really interesting stuff. We should mention that. So his wife in it is played by Barbara Hershey, and although she doesn't have a huge amount to do, she's always great. She's great in The Entity. That was like one of my favourite films that Barbara Hershey's in, and I think she's very good in this. Although she doesn't have a lot to do. There's also Rachel Tickerton, who plays Robert Duvall's character's partner, and she I know from Total Recall.
Yeah, Total Recall she's in. Yeah.
Robert Duvall's character, I find some of his plot to me lessens the impact of the movie a little bit. I find, especially the stuff with his wife, which I have to say, and that to me really dates it, because they're not very nice to his wife in the film. They're kind of the problem with his wife is that she seems to have, and they say things like, she lost all her looks when she had children, and I don't know. I just found that kind of stuff feels quite dated. I thought, and to me that kind of took away from the kind of impact of Michael Douglas. To me that felt like the morale Hollywood stepping in and saying, this is why you shouldn't do what Michael Douglas is doing, and I felt a little bit like it took away the kind of emphasis on what Michael Douglas was doing. But I suppose you need that, antagonist, protagonist in the film. And Robert Duvall's great. He's a great actor, and he's always kind of, a joy to watch on screen.
Yeah, I think, he's obviously sort of honest cop who's good at his job, and yeah, as the film progresses, like I said, he's sort of trying to piece these things together because it's his last day. No one's really interested, and they're like, "Oh, just go and sit at your desk and wait for the day to finish." And even his captain, is not interested in anything he's got to say, and tells him at one point, "I never liked you anyway."
Yeah.
So, but even despite that, still perseveres.
I think it's an interesting one. I've read quite a few reviews. A lot of people, I think it split people down the middle when this came out back in the day, and I think even now, 25, 26 years on, it's still kind of dividing the audiences somewhat.
I mean, what I would say, the sort of watching it again now, the initial thought was white privilege. Was a white guy with with a job and a car and everything like that, and he's not initially doesn't appear to have any problems, and it's like, why are you lashing out at everyone? But, obviously, under the surface, he does have mental issues, shall we say, and he has lost his job and things like that. So it's not as clear cut as it would initially appear. Right. But I think, and especially with that first scene with the convenience store, the Korean guy, when like you mentioned, he's talking about the way he speaks and things like that. You think that's a bit. It's sort of earring on racist, but then later on, he encounters somebody who really is, massively bigoted in every way, and obviously, doesn't agree with anything that he says. So I think it's the way these people act. It's not who they are or where they're from that irritates him. It's just they're not allowing him to just get on with his day effectively. They're just getting in his way. It doesn't matter where they're from, who they are.
No, because exactly. Because I mean, like you say, there were many different scenes of him interacting with different people, and they're from all over the place. And he is clearly, maybe to quote the new film with Russell Crowe, he's unhinged, and he's losing his mind somewhat. And so probably in his eyes, he just wants to attack anyone that's getting in his way, because his kind of journey through the film is to get home to his wife and child. I found a really interesting interview with Michael Douglas at the time, and he was saying, I think at the time it felt like that even that kind of the white privileged man who had the nice job couldn't keep his job, and he was he'd been made redundant or had lost his job, and that kind of they in his words, they'd won the Vietnam War, they'd won the war, and then they were all coming home, and then even they weren't being looked after, and no. People, I think by the early 90s, things were starting to, cracks were starting to appear again, and films like this were kind of a kind of reflection of that, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really good. I mean, you mentioned the scene with so he goes into the surplus army shop, and the guy and the owner of that store is played by Frederick Forrest, who I still to this day, I remember when I first saw this, that scene terrified me. It's so, because you watch, Frederick Forrest is he's a great actor, he's a great kind of character actor, but he's literally spitting when he talks. He's just, he's so into that role, and it just makes it so, that's such a claustrophobic, the whole film is quite a claustrophobic film at times, and in that shop, as soon as you know what's going on, which you realise quite early on in that scene what's going on, it's quite unpleasant, and it's a really, I think it's a great film. I think it's slightly dated maybe, but I think it's a very it's well edited. It looks great as well.
Oh, absolutely, the
cinematography is really good in there.
It's really well paced. It moves briskly along. I don't think there's any scene that feels like it's wasted or unnecessary.
No, it gets to where it's going very quickly,
but I think it's helped by the fact that, like I say, it's sort of a series of scenes basically where, he starts at the convenience store, and then we cut and we see a bit of Robert Duvall, and then we go back to Michael Douglas, and it's the gang members, and then we cut again, and then he's at the next place, and it's like a series of sort of little scenes that are different portions of his journey.
As he goes through, he's kind of going up through society. He starts at the bottom, and then he ends up going through, without giving too many of the scenes away if you haven't seen it. There's a very funny scene on a golf course, for instance, with people who have way too much money for their own good. And, so he starts at the bottom and he works his way up to get to where he's going. And so he does literally encounter all people from all types of society, and he hates them all, just because he's just on a mission to get home to his wife and his daughter, and in doing so, just kind of wrong place at the wrong time for a lot of these people. It is a good film, and I think it still holds up. I watched it on Amazon. I had it on DVD. I've got it on DVD, but I watched this on Amazon. It's not on Prime. I paid for the rental on there. That looked fine. So there must be a Blu-ray out there of it.
Oh, there is a Blu-ray. Yeah, I mean, I've got the DVD, so it's an old snapper. I even remember where I bought this. I bought it in a shop in Times Square when I went to New York in 1999.
Oh, so that's an American version of it.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
I don't know how I remember that. I just do. I remember where I picked it up. I doubt that shop is there anymore.
Do you remember the name of the shop?
No, not a clue. It's over 20 years ago. Yeah, there has been a Blu-ray around for quite a while now. I mean, like I said earlier, the DVD doesn't look great. I mean, the Blu-ray isn't perfect, but I think it's definitely a step up. So I think if I find the Blu-ray quite cheap, I might upgrade. And this also doesn't have any extras on it. It does have the full screen version. I think it was mainly in America they used to do that widescreen and the full screen. Why you would ever want the full screen one, I don't know. I suppose if you've still got a square telly and you don't like black bars, then I suppose that's what you do. But the Blu-ray does have a couple of extras on it. It's got a commentary with Joel Schumacher and Michael Douglas. It's got an interview as well. I think a short interview with Michael Douglas, and the trailer, which actually this has as well. I think, yeah, it does. Weirdly, there's only stereo sound on this and on the Blu-ray as well. I don't know why. That was obviously the soundtrack they used rather than surround sound. But maybe one day it'll be remastered and given a spanking 5.1 track, who knows. In America there was a digibook version as well, which had a sort of 30 odd pages, I think, of notes on the film.
Great. And do you have a favourite Joel Schumacher film?
Probably this, to be honest. Probably this. I've got a soft spot for Batman Forever. I know it's not the greatest. I mean, I'll even sit and watch Batman and Robin if I must. And obviously Lost Boys.
Yeah, he had a great career, and he made films like 8mm was one. Tigerland, quite a good one. Phone Booth, of course, with Colin Farrell. He made some good films in his career. But yeah, I always, Lost Boys was a favourite of mine growing up.
Yeah.
So I always enjoyed that one. And yes, I think you're right. This one is a very good one of his. So that was Falling Down. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, let us know in the comments below.
Hit the subscribe button there, and don't forget to push that bell for notifications. There's some other videos to check out over there. Come and find us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and join us next week for another video.